I'm from Central PA. Think trees. Little League World Series, everybody's seen it on TV. That's where I live, okay? Come up here, such a wonderful facility, a real tribute to your area. I loved traveling through the area and seeing all the tributes to veterans. It's wonderful. You don't see that everywhere you go in this country, so be thankful for that. When I started doing this, it was really difficult. It's still difficult talking about this, no matter how many times I do it. But my father, his name's Bruce Brady. I have a Bruce here. These guys are all basically my fathers, okay? The Vietnam War was something that people didn't want to talk about then. They don't want to talk about now. They kind of wanted to put it away. I asked my father many times growing up. I knew he was in the war. Didn't know anything else. And the confusion just kept compounding itself, and I'll get into that a little bit. I remember seeing his uniforms in the closet, and I marveled at it. Made me want to be a soldier. And I saw the patch on his arm, the left shoulder. It was 4th Infantry. So I thought my dad was in the 4th Infantry. I was born at Fort Carson, 4th Infantry, home of the 4th Infantry in Colorado. So whenever I asked my father about what he did in the war, where he was, what he was involved in, there was nothing. You know, it was something you realized you didn't want to talk about. So it was something I didn't. And thankfully, my daughter's here. It was about her age, when I was 12, that I really got kind of serious about it and wanted to know more. So I kind of, did what I could, researching, reading, books, movies, whatever it was, all the way through college. Trying to soak up whatever I could about Vietnam, and still never knew what my father had done. Well, he went to a reunion in Indianapolis, in fact, was his first reunion. Well, I think Texas might have been his first. He really, every subsequent year was better and better and better, and he finally told me a very little bit about what was going on in Vietnam for him. Found out he was in the 101st Airborne. Found out he was in I Corps. Vietnam's separated by 4 military regions, I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, 4 Corps, going north to south. And just to give you an idea, I Corps was the very far north segment of the country, right up to the DMZ. The Marines were in I Corps for the first 5 years of the battle. Well, by the time the 101st got there in 1970, they were the last full division left, trying to stem the tide that the Marines had done for all those years. And what people don't realize, and this goes back to how ill-educated I was, even though I thought I knew a little bit about the Vietnam War, 55% of our casualties came from I Corps. Nobody saw fighting in I Corps because, the majority of I Corps is made up of jungles and mountain peaks and places where there are no villages. You can't drive a tank into the A Shaw Valley. You just can't do it. And these are the battles these guys fought. These are the conditions these guys lived in every day. To be in the jungle in this area around Ripcord, you can't see 10 yards in front of you, can't see 5 yards in front of you in some places. If you take a trail, it could be suicide. A high-speed trail. High-speed trails are explained to me about, this big. That's your high-speed trail through the jungle. Temperatures soar to 100, 110 degrees every day. You're humping with rucksacks that weigh 80 to 100 pounds. You're carrying your ammo. You're carrying everything else. You hope that you can get resupplied. You don't get showers. You don't get hot meals. And your existence is living day to day with your brother, hoping that you can make it to see tomorrow. So, needless to say, everything I knew and had learned about Vietnam was nothing of what my father had seen and what Mr. Whipple had seen. So I needed a new education. And he starts telling me these things, and I get interested. And on my own, living in PA, one of the guys from the association's named Frank Marshall, and what a great guy, O'Brien. I mean, he's true South Philly guy. He's about this tall, just a riot. He I go to his house, and I'm there all day, and he's telling me these things. And he was in Alpha Company with my father. They didn't even know each other. Again, Alpha Company, so undermanned were these units. A typical Army infantry company can be up to 120 men. Well, by the time Ripcord comes around with no resupply and they're drawing troops out, your average company was more or less a platoon. And your platoons were made up of 3 squad. Your companies were made up of 3 platoons, and then you had squads within those platoons. So they're really undermanned. But even with that, this goes to show what they're fighting in. They didn't know everybody. Even though, first platoon, second platoon, third platoon might be scattered along a ridge line, they would never see each other, would never know each other. The chances of that happening were slim to none, and they met each other at reunions many years later. So he's telling me all these things about Ripcord and what happened there, and he's getting me interested, and he's pushing me to write because I'm a journalist. And the last thing I wanted to do was take on this topic because it is so tough. I mean, trying to explain military action, having not been in the military, is really, really difficult. And he alluded to it earlier, and it is true. So I read the books, and I reread the books, and I reread the books, and you still have to go back and forth and back and forth. The acronyms, all the terms. So I was like, okay, Frank, if I do this, I'm going to do it in a way that preserves the legacy of the men who were there while explaining it so that their children, their sisters, their mothers can read and hopefully understand a little bit about what it was like to be there. Because to sit in and listen to 2 guys who were there talk about what they were doing, you have no idea. I mean, because they'll be talking about NDPs and the CO and all that. You have no idea what's going on. So I was like, I'm not going to do any of that. Everything's going to be spelled out so you can read it and hopefully understand. And that has kind of become my calling. I feel like that's what I do with this book. And that's why I wanted to do this book, because with every subsequent interview I did, and there are over 200 men that are in the book, a lot more than that I actually talked to. Some of them didn't want to be on the record, but they provided me information just as a reference. It is just an overwhelming one, amazing too, what these guys went through in 1970, given everything that happened previous up to that time, what we had in the area and now was gone, because by this time you have a new president, Vietnamization's in full effect. Everybody know what Vietnamization was? We were turning the war over to the South, and they didn't want to fight it. And it's like Dr. Smith said, the political aspects of this war bogged it down, and all of this meant nothing to the guys on the ground. It meant absolutely nothing, because all they wanted to do was keep their buddy alive and make it to the next day. So it's about the men that fought. It's not about the officers and strategy and all that other good stuff. That's been hashed out and can be hashed out from now to the end of time. And you can have guys argue about all of that minutia, if you will. But the human side of this is what intrigued me and still does to this day. When I first started getting into it, as a guy, a big sports fan, you hear, the only professional athlete killed in the Vietnam War was killed at the Battle of Ripcord. How many people knew that? Very few, if any. Bob Couse, who was an All-American at Oklahoma, became Rookie of the Year for the Buffalo Bills, because of his ROTC duty at Oklahoma, had a discussion with his wife, Jan, could have gone National Guard, not had to go over, and he was like, Jan, I can't do that. I spent a couple days talking to Jan. That was really, really tough. Jan, if you know the story, Bob was artillery, and he was on the Firebase, and he would hump the shells with the guys. He's a lieutenant. He doesn't have to do that. But he was always smiling, and everybody you talked to in his artillery battery loved him to death. And always had a gregarious laugh, infectious personality. Bob was killed hours before his son was born stateside. And he had a daughter at the time, but he told Jan before he went, I enlisted to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm not taking the easy way out. I'm going to do what I was supposed to do. He went to Vietnam and he served, and he lost his life, and his son carries his name today. That's one of the stories. That's one of the stories. And then you have another person, Chuck Norris. Everybody knows Chuck Norris and the action star. His brother was killed at the Battle of Ripcord. He was with Alpha Company. There was some discussion as to who would take point. There was some arguing about it. Everybody know what the point man does in an infantry unit. You're literally on the point. You lead the guys. The point man did not have a good survival rate in Vietnam. Well, his first day walking point, he was killed. Matter of minutes, out on patrol. Willie Norris, his buddies called him Willie. Who knew that? I mean, Chuck doesn't talk about that kind of stuff. He did come to one of the reunions with his mother while she was still alive. They paid tribute to Willie there. But there again, that's the kind of thing that kind of sucked me in. And then you get to talking to everybody else and their stories. And they're all important. They're all stories that I think need to live and be shared and passed down from generation to generation. Just because what happened stateside during the Vietnam War, that doesn't mean that we can't preserve the legacy of the men who fought there and did their job, did their duty, and did it in a way that we can be proud. Because if you think about what happened when they came back, and, you know, as Bruce said, he went through hell for a whole year. He comes back home. They all come back home. If you can imagine, in today's, the younger group of soldiers that are coming back and the pride that they can return to the States with, wear their uniform, get the pat on the back, the parades, everything else. That stuff didn't exist in 1968, 69, 70, 71, 72. And didn't for years later. It's hard to understand that for somebody like me who wasn't alive to see it. I can read about it, but I just can't wrap my head around it. And to know that my father and those gentlemen came home and their officers told them, you might want to take your uniform off before you go on the plane. What? Why? Well, they're protesting the war outside or in the terminal. What do you mean? I mean, can you imagine? I mean, these guys, it was enough to get home alive. The average combat soldier in Vietnam, if you read the Department of Defense statistics, saw an average of 240 days of combat in a year. The average combat soldier saw 240 days of combat in a year because of the helicopter. They didn't have to take convoys from battle to battle. They took helicopters, and they could go from here to there. And you're hurt. You get pulled out. It's a flesh wound. You go back to Charlie Med, patched up. You could be back out in the field the very next day or the very same day. That's what these guys did, and then they come home and have that happen. It's hard for me to understand. And I think it's due to that experience that you see guys coming home today getting the kind of warm embrace that they do, because I don't think the Vietnam era soldier wanted to see that happen again. And they are responsible for, in large part, in my mind, the way we treat today's veterans. So as you see, Vietnam lives, it's alive in me, in my daughter, and It's something that I feel needs to live in more people. It's something that people need to talk about and need to know about. It's easily, I mean, there's hands down the most misunderstood war we've ever been a part of. And because of all of those reasons that I've just explained. When these guys are out in the jungle, you have to realize, you think jungle, they're basically in mountainous areas that are like the Appalachian Range that goes all the way down into North Carolina. Some of those high peaks, that's how high they were, but it was still 100 degrees during the day. They had to live through that. They had to endure that as well as stay alive every day. The personal connection they have with each other is amazing, and you see it at the reunions. You see it when they get together and talk. And it's moving. It's really moving, because with my father, it's like the first time I saw him with those guys, he literally lit up. And in some way, shape, or form, I think it's almost like he's been validated, because he cannot explain, and this goes for any combat soldier. If you've seen combat, it's hell. It's awful. You can't explain that to somebody that's never seen it and have them understand what it is that you have seen, experienced, felt from the time that you fire your first shot and you smell the senses, the sounds, everything that goes along with that. You just can't imagine that. And then after it's done, what do? You have to pick up the pieces. You have to get your buddies out. You have to clear a landing zone possibly. That is something you can't understand unless you've been through it. So how does one sit there and tell a 12-year-old kid, I understand that now. I didn't understand it then. I remember when I told my dad I might want to be in the military. Not so nice look on his face at that point. And that is also a key to remember, because if that were me today, it would be a source of pride, right? My son wants to follow my footsteps. But at that time, the way those guys were treated when they came home, why would I want my son to go through that? Why would I want my son to experience what I experienced, not only in terms of combat, but the way he was treated after he came out? Get off the plane, go home, go back to work. Nothing. Do you have any issues you need to talk about? None of that. It didn't exist. We'll deal with it later, whatever it may be. Self-medication, however. So that's the book, the personal stories. And I have to say thank you to those guys, because it's very difficult to talk about these things. A lot of them told me these stories having never told their own families the stories. And I took that very seriously. It's an honor to be able to do that. But it's something we can't forget. We can't forget the sacrifice that existed then in terms of what these guys had to go through. Now, we're here to answer any questions you might have. I can answer any questions. Mr. Whipple can answer questions. Amazing resource here in terms of veterans, and you're very lucky to have him. We'll turn it over to questions. If you guys have anything. You have another microphone? Yeah.
White Schultz & Associates Incorporated. Investment products and services. For more information, call 799-9889 or 866-799-9889.
Big AAA Storage, offering individually enclosed climate-controlled units from 5x10 to 10x15 feet. Recommended for records, furniture, valuables, and antiques. as well as outdoor units ranging from 10 by 15 to 10 by 35 feet. All units are fenced, lighted, equipped with video cameras, and electronic keyed access with security gate. Open 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Big AAA Storage, fulfilling your storage needs.
Anyone who's had our chicken knows it's plump and juicy. What they may not know is that it's also 100% natural.
All our chickens are certified, humanely raised, no antibiotics, on a high-quality diet of soy and grain.
What's good for the animal is good for our guests. Why are they called tenders?
They're called tenders because they come from the tenderloin to the breast, hand-trimmed just for colors. It's not a strip or a finger, it is the true tenderloin.
They're cooked to order, just waiting to be dipped in one of our sauces. I'll put our chicken tenders up against anybody's.
I agree, they're second to none.
Tell me why this is such a great area to raise chickens.
We've got all the fresh water from the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, fresh, clean air. We're very lucky to have this, and it works perfect for growing our chickens.
Not only the chicken tenders, but our crispy chicken, our grilled chicken. They are delicious.
That's like my Granny Franklin used to make. That's outstanding, Craig.
Welcome to Delicious.